Welcome back to another episode of Living with FASD. This is a human interest and educational show for those living with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, their families and loved ones. But what makes this podcast unique is it's by someone with both professional and living experience with an FASD. I want to welcome back my dear friend, Dr. Kathryn Page, who started this podcast with me for a couple episodes, and life took us in different directions. I'm so glad to have you back. And also with us is Ms. Deb Evensen, who is a well-known name in the FASD circles. She's been a pioneer for decades and has some really exciting stuff. So I want to give you both a few moments just to introduce yourselves, say hello, whatever you want to say to our listeners and viewers. And I'm just so excited for today's Candid Conversation. Welcome to you both.
Wonderful to be here with both of you. Patty, a new friend, Deb, an old friend, and I am talking to you from Mexico, which maybe you can tell by the colors and the bricks. I'm really happy to be part of this effort, both Patty's book that she has put together of stories of people, adults who were diagnosed with fetal alcohol as adults, and just the general what she's doing, which is to raise awareness of this condition, which is just, it sort of shares these qualities with addiction. If you're in 12-step rooms, you've heard the phrase something like cunning, baffling, and powerful to refer to addiction itself, or the substance like alcohol or the drug, probably addiction. Same thing with fetal alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful, and largely invisible. And so very much looking forward to seeing what comes out of this conversation, including a trailer for a really groundbreaking, remarkable video that's coming out thanks to Deb. And so with that, let's segue over to her.
So I'm Deb Evensen, and I'm happy to be here with these two brilliant women. And I'm coming to you from my home, my cabin that I live in Homer, Alaska. And it's cold up here. You see, I've got a turtleneck on. I know the rest of you are very warm. And I was just telling Patty and Kathy that we have a black bear, and I'm hoping it's in my neighborhood right now, wandering around. So I'm hoping it'll come by my window and I can show you the bear as we're talking. Yeah, my interest in fetal alcohol began in 1982 when I was in charge of a psychiatric hospital school program and met my first child who was diagnosed as fetal alcohol syndrome, because we had somebody doing her pediatric residency at the hospital where I was working, who had just come from the University of Washington. And so I first heard the words fetal alcohol syndrome then. And then after I moved to Alaska in '86 and started traveling around the state as an education specialist with the schools in '88, I ran headfirst into the challenges of prenatal alcohol exposure. And spent all these years, trying to working with schools in many different capacities in Alaska and other places. And while it started out really looking like something hopeless, I want to say that right now, I was just telling Kathy and Patty that I have more hope for the future than I have ever had, because the adults living with FASD are showing us and demonstrating where we're going and what we can do as we all work together. So I'm excited to talk about this, excited to talk about our film, and happy to be here.
So before we get into the trailer for this recent work, which debuts in 2 weeks?
September 8th at the Bear's Tooth Theater, a restaurant in Anchorage, Alaska, and the day before International FAS Day.
Yeah. So I think most people, Deb, probably would recognize your name from the original production that you were involved in, which is 8 Magic Keys, right? Can you talk for just a quick minute about that? And for all the listeners and viewers, the show notes will have the link for that video, which lives on YouTube.
Right. Okay, well, I'll just tell you the story behind the 8 Magic Keys. In 1997, Jen Lutkey from Canada, who's well known in the field, a real leader, and I were presenting at a conference in Hawaii. And the night before, we were going to be on a panel the next day. And the night before our presentation, we were sitting at the hotel just talking. And we started, people used to say, well, there's no recipe for dealing with fetal alcohol. You have to understand it, but they didn't give any real specific strategies. And we were hearing that as complaints all around. And we said, we just started talking about what we knew that worked from our own experience, from her as a mother and an advocate, and for me as an educator. And so we started just naming them. And she said, well, structure, of course. And I said, yeah, and consistency. And so we just named, and it ended up being 8. And I said, let's call it the 8 Magic Keys. Yeah. That's how it came to be. That's all. It was just a conversation talking about what worked. Yeah. And so the next day we presented it. And that 8 Magic Keys kind of just, the lists of it and different presentations kind of went around the world. It was amazing. I thought I'd done all these papers and writings, and I thought but this simple.
And that's what caught fire.
That's what caught fire. It was amazing. We were like surprised. So anyway, fast forward to, I was working with Anchorage School District in 2000 and starting in 2009, 2010. As an education consultant to work with the challenges of the 5% of the kids that we as students assume in one of the largest school districts in the nation, which is Anchorage, believe it or not. And one of the most diverse school districts, we were dealing with the challenges of fetal alcohol spectrum disorders and our goal was to increase the capacity of our educators and our system to assist students and get more positive outcomes. So I got to put together a think tank of really well-known, passionate educators. And we got together once a month and we talked about ideas. Mm-hmm. And they said that we came up with a brochure about the 8 Magic Keys that went to all the schools and all the parents who were enrolling their kids, about get your child a diagnosis if they have this background so we can help, things like that. And the think tank, one of the people said, let's do a video. So the 8 Magic Keys is a result of teachers on their own time, volunteering, coming together with the equipment that they had in the school to use, writing this curriculum and putting together this little animated 8 Magic Keys about the strategies within the school system.
That really fills my heart with hope and joy, because at least, in my neck of the woods, I have found school environment to be very, very reluctant, right? Simply because they have so many things to focus on that it just, I have hit closed doors. Yeah, closed doors. And even with SB 1016 passing last year, the governor of California signed it, making FASD one of those qualifying diagnoses for special ed services. It's such a slow road to see any kind of meaningful change. And so what you're saying, that this really found its origins within education, really fills me with hope, right? If it can be embraced in Anchorage, it can be embraced anywhere.
It is what I have learned from my years of, I've been an educator for more than 45 years now. I've been around a very long time. And when my years of working, especially with fetal alcohol, in the school system with that subject, I have found that the grassroots element is what's saving us, is what's leading us forward, is that people working together on grassroots level can solve problems that from a distance, like from the research, looks unsolvable. Because when we first started talking about fetal alcohol in Alaska and around the country, when it first started becoming an issue, when we were talking about it, people were doing training, it looked so hopeless. And that a lot of that was coming from the research, because it just looked like there was nothing we could do. And people on the grassroots level, including this band of teachers in Anchorage, that have proven differently, that we can figure out, by just working together, we can figure out ideas that the researchers haven't been able to figure out. This is the resilience.
And it seems to me that, what you guys came up with is just, nothing is too difficult. It's very common sense kinds of things that, put them together, and it's very powerful, the effect.
Yeah.
Oh,
go ahead.
Can I just,
Sure.
I think I understand that in order to bring this about, it took a lot of training, it took a lot of relationship building, a lot. And so it seems to me that this kind of collaborative creativity and problem solving does not happen just because somebody's boss makes them get together at a meeting and, okay, now you're gonna, deal with this issue and solve some problems, because people are sitting there going, So if I remember right, I think when you described this to me first, and I don't want to gloss over that part, just how essential it is that you made warm, real connection with the human beings that you're going to work with, and helped them come together and make those connections with each other. Is that right?
And supported them as they came up with ideas I hadn't thought of. Because I worked. The other thing is, I found that, so when we first start talking to teachers, they go, oh, I have to work with this kid who has this disability, and this kid with this, and this kid with trauma, and this kid with, and they think, oh no, it's one more thing. And it's a hard time to be a teacher right now. It's a really hard time. And what I make them a promise at every one of my trainings and every one of my university classes I teach, that taking the time to learn about FASD will make their job easier. It will help them with kids with all those other disabilities, and it will lessen their load. And I promise them that. And I've never had a teacher come and say, no, this has made my job harder. Because once, as educators, when we can deal with anything once we understand it, but they have to have enough training, enough education to have enough knowledge about the subject that they can start figuring out what to do. So we spent a lot of time. I taught lots of university classes in the schools. I did trainings for all the school psychs, all the administrators, all those kinds of things. All the teacher assistants, and we did follow-up trainings. And then I went in the schools and helped work with the teachers.
So I know that's why I like the neurobehavioral model, because you can use it not just with FASD, but with any neurobehavioral condition. You can use it with your ADHD kids and loved ones, with those on the autism spectrum. Heck, I use it with my mom with her Lewy body dementia.
It shows that we as humans are more similar than we are different. Yeah. I agree.
So you must be pretty excited by some of the work that FASD United is doing right now with that survey, that national survey on the state of education.
Absolutely.
that's going to be really exciting to see what kind of policy comes out of that. I can't wait to see that, when it comes to fruition.
When the information gets into our systems,
Mm-hmm.
and then it just becomes, this information becomes part of all our systems, all our policies, then we will have realized we've really achieved something. Yeah.
But I don't want to get away too far from what we're here to talk about today. 8 Magic Keys was not enough. You have a sequel.
Okay. So Hope Finkelstein, who is a FASD person for Alaska now, called me a couple of years ago and said, we want to do an anniversary edition of 8 Magic Keys. And she said, what do you suggest? And we talked about it. I said, the toughest time for individuals living with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders is the early adult life. And our schools are not preparing for adult life, and we're not talking about adult life, and we're missing it big. And so let's do something with adults, about adults. And she said, okay. And they sent the money to the Alaska Center for FASD with Marilyn Pierce Bolger as a director. And we got together. So they gave us some money to deal with it. And I said, well, nothing about us without us, right? So the ideas for what works in adult life come from adults living with FASD. Mm-hmm. So we got a group of adults together and started having Zoom meetings. This was during the pandemic, and we just started talking. And we told them that, we're going to come up with the direction we gave them, basically, is we want to do a follow-up video. And what ideas work for you? And it could be 2 ideas or 45 ideas. And they just started talking. And as it ended up being 8. And we just laughed about that because that was just chance. I mean, it could have been any number. And we weren't trying to do another 8 Magic Keys. We said, what works in your life? And they started sharing it. It was so exciting. I like treasure some of those moments on Zoom, listening to people talking about their lives. And we included in this, there's a whole spectrum of abilities like we all have. We're all human beings. And so we included people, somebody who is also more, has more challenges than a lot of people. And so we included the spectrum. And I was just really excited. We listened to what everyone said. They had brilliant ideas. Yeah. So that's who did this. Yeah.
Kathy, is there anything you want to say before we show the trailer?
No, I'm dying to see it.
I know, me too.
Well, we hired a wonderful filmmaker, Dan, and he put it all together. And so I'm very excited about it. So let me share my screen. Okay. Hopefully this will work. Here we go.
Growing up, I always knew there was something different about me, just didn't know what.
I was not too happy. I didn't want to be labeled.
The way I was able to be okay with the challenges, I started talking about it.
I don't really like to consider it a disability because I don't really see it that way.
He's just an amazing guy. He can do so much more than you think he can.
I have a 32-year-old and I have a 16-year-old, and I broke the cycle.
One of my strengths is finding something that I love doing.
Breaking it down into tiny baby steps. Start with step 1. Once it's completed, move to step 2.
One, I wasn't alone, and that there was nothing wrong with me.
I am who I am, and I am blessed to be who I am.
Without my self-advocacy, I wouldn't be as strong and independent as I am now.
To help people understand their strengths and weaknesses so that they can achieve their greatest potential.
Oh, I can't wait to see it. Look at your name there as producer. Oh, I'm so glad that you brought that, for us to include in the podcast. So, of course,
I
it made my heart happy to see Gina. She's such a dear.
wonderful. And Justin, the man, young man,
Yes.
everyone's young compared to me. So a young man in the wheelchair, the picture of him with a woman, that is his love. And they have a long-term love. It's one of the most beautiful love stories I've ever heard in my life.
Aww.
So it just, all of these people share what works for them. And I'm, you can tell I just got goosebumps, and even knowing as much about it as I do, I'm so thrilled because I think people living with FASD are taking the lead in this field, and that's where it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
The rest of us can learn.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I share all the time is that internet search results, they scare the bejesus out of people, especially parents. But the search engines don't provide the caveats, right? They don't provide the context. Oh, this factoid is based on only one study that happens to be very small, right? In other words, take it with a grain of salt.
Right.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I'm wondering, Deb, if you could kind of extrapolate, what element or elements do you think is most important in helping people come to this blooming, self-advocacy, self-acceptance, being leaders, and what are the conditions that exist?
Well,
around?
we all need to make sense to ourselves.
Yeah.
And so learning about the differences in our own lives that make us who we are is really important. And I think talking about, I got glasses when I was in 4th grade, and I can see we're all wearing glasses. And I remember learning that I was nearsighted, and it's who I am, and it's part of who I am. And when fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, I don't know anyone who's living with it who doesn't understand it, who's doing super well. And so I think when we first started, I meet lots of parents who say, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to label my child because, they're gonna, and so I think, what if my parents hadn't been willing to label me as being nearsighted? My life would be different now.
Right.
And so we have to understand it. And I think for the professionals too, we can't solve it until we understand what it is.
So it sounds like one of the things that you're implying is that there has to be diagnosis.
Yeah, there has to be. Otherwise, we're just guessing.
Yep.
Yeah. In my opinion,
Yeah.
from my perspective. And
I think it was a really good question, Kathy, about what sets the stage for someone to be willing, right, to explore that, and begin to talk about it, because talking about it is what is going to normalize the condition. At 5% of the population, it is kind of a normal thing, like it or not. Yeah, so I can't, and I can never remember Justin's last name. He was the producer on FASD Project.
Yeah, I can't either.
Neither.
It's driving me nuts. I just Googled producer of FASD Project and got a nice little thing on the documentary, but not the answer I wanted. He and I were at a meeting a year ago, not even a year ago, sponsored by it was a FASD Now program. That's one of the advocacy programs here in California. And he and I, just as luck would have it, we were in the same breakout room, along with Dr. Jones, Dr. Kenneth Lyons Jones, and one other person, bless her heart, who never said a thing. But, I've only known for 3 years or so that I'm on the spectrum. I came to this realization from studying with FASDs, Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Consultation Education Training Services. So I am one of their certified facilitators for the neurobehavioral model. But as I was learning about all the primary characteristics and the secondary symptoms, I'm thinking, I kept checking off the boxes because I was looking at my quirks. And so then, of course, I had a very revolutionary conversation with my mom, who confirmed daily drinking. It was the 60s. Nobody knew any better, so I don't blame her at all. But I remember talking with him about, I've told a handful of people, but I don't know how to go about making this disclosure. How do I decide who I should disclose to, yada, 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 simply because I'm a professional. And, as soon as you say something, people will look at you differently. Let's see if we can see the symptoms, and I was just really hesitant at that point. I mean, less than a year ago. I never in a million years imagined where I would be today. But his words were so wise. He said, the only way past the stigma is straight through it. And so I've been going straight through it ever since. And now I have a book, and now I have a podcast, and, I talk about it right and left. But but that's my experience. It's probably going to be something completely different for each individual that sees themselves within this spectrum.
Deb, you started to say something.
Yeah, sorry. I found, and I just had a young adult share with me a bad experience they had with their job when they shared the information. And so I can see the reasons why sometimes people don't want to address it because they're afraid of that. But again, I agree with Justin that it's going straight through it, sharing information when everyone understands fetal alcohol and everyone understands it brings some cognitive differences. And that's all it is cognitive diversity. Mm-hmm. And when we understand that, like we're understanding autism a lot in our society now. Yeah. People go, he's on the autism spectrum, and everyone goes, oh, okay, cool, and we go on. And we just, it's knowledge about it, because as human beings, we can deal with anything if we understand it.
Yeah.
I wonder, I think you're right, Deb. But I was wondering, Patty, listening to you talk, if you've encountered any downside to going straight through it. Anything?
So I remember, I was working for a different foster family agency when I came to this realization than the one that employs me now. And I went to one of my coworkers first. She and I are still BFFs. And neither one of us are there. But after a while, I thought, I need to say something to my supervisors so they understand why I keep offering this training to the other staff. The company I worked for at the time had over 30 offices spread throughout California. And I was offering to do this, several $100 training for free to every employee, because no matter which program, it's the same population, there's the same needs. And it wasn't going anywhere. And so I told my immediate supervisor, I said, yeah, so, I discovered in this process that I'm on the spectrum. And she was like, oh, that doesn't surprise me. I'm like, her comment took me by surprise because, when I questioned her, she's like, well, sometimes you say or do odd things, and I just have to tell myself, oh, that's just Patty. And, and my reaction was, I didn't think my FASD was showing. But apparently it shows more than I realize. Surprise.
Patty, was that a downside?
No, it caught me off guard, but no. And then she said, I want you to tell, the next level up. And so when I did, the response was, okay, thank you for sharing that. Now, what are you going to do about it? Which is very much a neurotypical kind of response, right? Puts the onus back on the person with a quote unquote disability.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I felt very unsupported. And it wasn't a bad thing in terms of like, I didn't lose my job. I didn't get written up. Nothing horrible happened. But it did let me know where within the company I could find support and where it would not be coming from. Which was disheartening. And it's, in part why I'm not there anymore.
Yeah. So the downside, if I'm hearing you right, was that rather than hearing, okay, what can we do to support you?
Mm-hmm.
It was like, alrighty then, what are you gonna do?
Exactly.
So you probably felt a little hung out to dry, maybe.
I'm thinking, what part of accommodations does this woman not understand? Accommodations are environmental. They're not within the person themselves.
And you were taken aback enough that you didn't have that at the tip of your tongue to say back to her.
Yeah.
Like, well, the main thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to let you guys know what accommodations I need.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
But I know that feeling of of being taken aback, where you don't have it ready to say.
Yeah. And I really haven't found pushback from too many other places. And I think possibly it's because I am putting it out there. For instance, the introduction to this very podcast it is by someone with both professional and living experience. Boom, it's out there. You can take it or leave it. You can take me or leave me. It's up to them how to work with me if they choose, right? But hopefully I'm conducting myself in such a way that shows, it's just my particular quirks, right? That's all any of us can do. It's neurodiversity.
There
all
are
different.
downsides. There are downsides to go through it. And I think it doesn't hurt for us to kind of maybe get clear on what those are. I'm not anywhere near clear on, what they all might be, but I was just thinking about, for me, telling my, I don't have an employer anymore, but telling people that I have this stuff, unless it's pegged to a particular thing that happens, like if I've lost something or, double booked, or, I'm not understanding auditory input, or I'm getting overly upset about something internally, not that you'd see it from the outside. If I can say, and this is, to me, this is a lot self-advocacy, to say, and big part of self-advocacy is developing an excellent skill at apology. Like, I'm really sorry, I forgot that thing. I have a brain injury, and it happens. And I hope you can forgive me, and I'm gonna maybe ask your help and reminding me next time, like a day ahead.
Yeah.
So often, I mean, depends on the circumstance. If I'm advocating for fetal alcohol, of course, I'll say that. Or if it's a circumstance that invites it, really. But I tend to be a little bit sparing about that. And if it's just people that I want to, clear up some muck with, I'll just call it a brain injury. And then if they want to know more, they will know. I'll tell them plenty more. But if I can peg it to that, like I've screwed up in some way, that's when I'll say it.
Yeah. And I really, one of the reasons I really like that, Kathy, is because most people, when they think of FASD, they think of like parental lifestyle or something like that,
Right.
where the focus really needs to be on the brain injury.
Yeah.
Caused by the alcohol, with, the mom is just the vehicle.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm remembering when I first started recognizing, I was going from school to school in very remote parts of Alaska, and, realizing that the techniques that we used weren't working for a good portion of the students that were on my caseload as having a behavior disorder. That's where I first got into it. And I remember sitting in my office at the Department of Ed going, as I was realizing, I was having my own little crisis in looking at their misbehavior, as we quoted, from being bad choices to not understanding. And it was a big change. It was a big change. And I had, because I'm really good at behavior modification. I know that way back when. And when it wasn't working, and as I didn't know what to do, and I sat there and I remember thinking, sitting at my desk going, if this understanding gets out and the society as a whole understands this, because I was seeing it with the kids. And I was realizing when we helped them with the things they didn't understand or provide support, reminded them, they did fine. We didn't have to punish them, put them in timeout. We didn't have to do all that stuff. When I was seeing that, I thought, this is going to change. This is going to be a revolution in how we understand behavior, going from good people, bad people, to, good choices, bad choices, to all of us are different. All of us are doing our best. And how can we help each other? And we're going to get far ahead. And I think that's starting to happen. Yeah. And being at the forefront of, as you're both explaining and sharing very bravely, some of your own experiences, it's hard being at the forefront. It's really hard being the one to cut down the pathway in the jungle, for others to follow. But I think that's what's starting to happen. And it's really.
Yeah. And it really, really needs to. So much of the work in, within the FASD circles is and I'm a coach for parents, right? And I have nothing against that, but there's millions and millions of adults who are just now looking at their life with this new FASD lens going, where do we start, right? Children are not the only ones that get that negative messaging from you're a bad kid. Adults get you're a bad person, right? You're worthless, you're lazy, you're unmotivated. And it's not any of that. We might be disorganized in our thinking. We might not be, we lack the cognitive skills, the underpinnings that lay beneath so many quote unquote normal behaviors, right? The cognitive skills that underlie getting anything done, whether it's big or little, right? And I think, Kathy, you said one time, or, the part of what you wrote about my book, we all have the appearance of normalcy, which leads to misunderstandings. by the world and even by ourselves, because we internalize all that negative messaging over time, that needs to be redone. And, especially those of us who are older, right? I was in my mid-50s. Well, that means my husband is too, right? Or, I've talked to so many people that were diagnosed in their 40s and 50s. Well, their spouses are, the same age range, right? And so we all grew up with that emphasis on good kid, bad kid, good choice, bad choice, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And then for those of us that went into sort of psychology world, we have sophisticated psychological terms for it. We have character disorders. And then we've got the Oprah world of like fear of success, or there are
The pop psychology.
oh my God, all kinds of labels. Pop psychology, there's psychology, there's and so how many of us went to therapy for years and years? We were lucky enough to have the resources to do that, but our therapists were working on our obvious unconscious conflicts that must be what's getting in the way of our moving ahead and achieving the kinds of things that obviously with our brilliant speaking style we were capable of doing.
Right. Or in ABA language, our secondary gain.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, that's right there in psychology as well. Exactly.
Give me a break.
Exactly.
Give me a break.
One of my very favorite shrinks, and I've had many. This beautiful man, who his whole thing, and he became very successful, wrote books, did trainings all over the place on the proposal that all of our behavior is purposeful.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's a cousin to secondary gain. But so his approach was always, so what is it that you're really causing to happen here that you want to have happen? By not finishing stuff, by putting out these great ideas of what you want to do and then never making them happen. What are you gaining by it? Is something I can't tell you how many, I don't know, tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars I've spent on a half a century of mental health, barking up the wrong tree, going down the wrong path. So, this may not be the time to say this, but every time I get in a conversation with people who really totally get it, like the two of you, I revive my dream that kind of comes and goes, as they do, about writing a book for therapists on how to recognize the footprints of this stuff.
Yes.
I wish you would.
Oh my God.
Yes.
All right, you guys. So here we are in vivo, right? You are both experts on this. So let's take like about a minute if we can, just cut a little slice out of our time. And what would you do in terms of support to get me to do this book? Here we are with an adult, about this. We have 8 magic keys. We're sitting here right with us. What do you think?
I'll invite you to Alaska to stay in my cabin in the winter by a warm wood stove and bring your computer, and it's calm and quiet, and I will feed you while you work.
All right.
There we go.
That sounds fabulous.
But so if I were to take, and it does sound good, although winter,
well, that's so that you never leave the cabin and you get it done.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It's calm and quiet. It's a good place to think.
Well, right. So, bringing this back out of my, personal quest here to the subject of this particular podcast, and basing so much in the 8 magic keys, which I imagine showed up in some form or other in this work that you did that resulted in this film. I imagine that what your people said works for them. A lot of it echoes those 8 magic keys. And you're nodding as if that is in fact the case. Is that true?
Some of it does, and some of it's different.
Really?
So it's not exactly the same thing because
Yeah.
it's evolved.
Yeah.
Because life has evolved. It's the same, it's similar principles, but it's yeah. I'm not going to give it away yet.
We'll have to watch. And
And
by the time this podcast airs, it will be out.
Okay.
Oh, good.
So I know the theater debut is September 8th. And I know Gina had mentioned that it will be, making the rounds within Alaska following that. When will it land on YouTube for the rest of us to watch?
It's going to be available through the Alaska Center for FASD, I think, soon after the premiere. And so, and of course, we'd love to do a follow-up on this podcast with show the whole film if it.
How long of a film is it?
It's only 40 minutes.
Okay.
Perfect.
It's very short.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. I think we can arrange that.
We could probably
I know who to talk to.
Get some of the adults that are on.
I think I have an in with the producer.
I think you do, but I'm feeling like a dog with a bone here on this question.
Okay.
In what way the 8 magic keys, the ones that we've all taught so many times, it's the core of a lot of the trainings that some of us do, really. And so in what way have they morphed? Can you just generalize in a not spoilerish way?
They've just morphed to fit adult life. And it's like not how, and it's what the adults do in their own life.
Right.
And what the things that they've learned in their own life that works for them. And,
so not so much like how do you communicate to kids using short sentences? It's more like
this is what works for me, and then we put it together. And I'm going to just divert here and talk about therapists and what therapists want to know. If we got together and did a few Zoom meetings with some therapists, that might be, and listen to them and what they need and why they would, how it might be a good structure for a book or a presentation or whatever for you as you are able to answer some of their questions. Because I'm imagining that therapists at the beginning might say what teachers do. I've already got my strategies. It works for everybody. I've got my clients and I've done this and this is what works. But as they get talking, we can start seeing some questions that they might have.
Yeah. So given a chunk of my career was therapy, I can say the same for therapy as for social work. What we learn is schooled in learning theory. So it's all about behavior is purposeful. And, the premise of behavior mod, as you know, Deb, is if you can find the right bribe or threaten the right punishment, eventually the person will make the choice you want them to make. And that's what we're all schooled in. You have variations of a theme, but that's what the theme is.
And learning theory is, go ahead. Sorry.
And it's great for a lot of people, but not so great for those of us who are neurodiverse. And so it's changing the lens that not all behavior is purposeful. It has so much to do with how does your brain work? Can you do those underlying tasks? And therapists and social workers are just not used to considering that question. And I think that's the work.
I do think that there is a black and whiteness to a lot of the fetal alcohol thinking. So the whole thing of can't, not, won't, honestly, there are shades of gray, and I would put it under what circumstances does it become can and will? And without those circumstances, it hangs out more in the can't, and some won't, because that's in there too. So it does get complicated as we are willing to recognize the complicatedness, because there still does exist the reality of laziness. I can attest to that, of a willful, rebellious kind of a no, not gonna do it. So I think I would love, going back, Deb, to your suggestion, to bring together therapists. And I think that it will be helpful to move away from the very strictly neurobehavioral model, which really is based on Diane Malbin's can't versus won't. And it is very black and white, and it has been very helpful to people to get that. I think it's a really important first step. First, second, third step. But I think there needs to be more beyond that as we try to understand ourselves. And try to maximize our own functioning.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think too, Deb, one thing I was thinking of with Kathy's former question on, how has things changed from 8 magic keys to 8 keys for adults? I think that morphing, right, over time, that growth has to do in part with, when we were young, as we were when your first project came out, parents and educators have to put the structures in place for the children, right? And so, but now when you're working with the adults, when you're talking with adults about what works, that's after they've learned that bit about self-advocacy, which is a little bit different, right? That's what my former boss was saying. Now, what are you going to do about it? And that put me in a place of scrambling. Okay, it's time to self-advocate. And I kind of swallowed and blinked instead.
So I'm going to give you a little hint. Advocacy is one of the keys. Advocacy is one of the keys.
All right. Self-advocacy. Yeah, great.
Yeah. And in order for us to step up and step out and do that, we really have to be accepting of self.
Which
embracing our unique.
It implies healing for a lot of us. It implies healing of the old stuff, the old attachment wounds around being misjudged, blamed, and shamed, and not recognized for who we were. And that takes healing that doesn't have to be that different from traditional psychotherapy. Once you understand the current, understanding of what's actually the reason for the behavior that caused that shaming and blaming in the first place.
Yeah, if the therapist can understand how to tap into what are the client's unique challenges and unique strengths, and with those pieces in mind, help them figure out, how to accept the good, the bad, and the ugly, because we've all got good, bad, and ugly pieces.
Yeah.
I do a lot of work with First Nations, and a lot of my work has been with Native Alaskans, Native Americans, and For My Heart Is. And they talk so much about what we do now, it affects the next 7 generations. And I think, I was just thinking of you talking, Kathy, about, well, both of you talking about having to go through your own healing process. And the fact of, it makes me almost teary-eyed thinking, because I know as an educator that's a deeper sentence, a deeper thing than you're saying. And I see people have to go through so much suffering before they get to their own understanding of their cognitive differences. But maybe all of the heroes that are going through that now, including the heroes that are in our film as adults living with FASD, having had to go through all of those, are making the future for our future generations to follow, where they won't have to.
Yeah.
And that's where
Amen.
we're going. That's where we're going.
What a
is that-
beautiful sentiment.
Which I think really circles back to Patty's, what you said at the beginning about taking this out to centers for excellence, and really anybody that wants to grow awareness and competence around fetal alcohol. But one issue with that is that finding venues where adults are actually the subject is that's going to be the hard part. So I think a lot of the venues where this gets shown is going to be venues funded by, whoever funds youth.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, look, this is what happens when we become adults, and here's what can help along the way.
Yeah.
That we don't have to limit sharing this to adult
Yeah.
oriented, because if we do, we're not going to find them.
And here's why you need that 10-year minimum 10-year roadmap ahead of you as you work with children.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so this has been just wonderful. I wonder, it almost feels like we're coming to kind of bringing it home.
Yeah, I think so.
Is there anything else that we have circling around our minds that we want to say or ask each other before we're done?
I'm thinking of a friend of mine who many years ago, I was invited into a sweat lodge, a traditional Native American sweat lodge. And my friend who invited me there, that sweat lodge changed my life. It did. But it also, that person told me a story of her, and she was Hopi. And she talked a story about how in times going back in time, there was a spiritual leader of her people who gave a prophecy, and he talked about how a challenging time was coming, and that a lot of children would be born, and he perfectly described some of the characteristics of children who have been prenatally exposed. But he went on to talk about these souls, these children. He said, they're souls who are coming to help the people. And as the people get together to help these children, and this is Deb's words, not his, of course, help these children and work to help them fit in and make their lives better, as a nation, the Hopi people would be healed. And I have never seen, this is why I feel so much hope for the future, is a resilience of humans as we get together to work to try to figure out what to do to make it better for adults living with FASD, for each other, that we're not going to make it worse. It's always going to make it better. And that's been my experience through these years, going through, marching alongside you folks living with fetal alcohol.
Yeah. I wanted to circle, and I think what a beautiful prophetic thing for him to have said.
Yes.
I truly do love that. And it's kind of like, noodling with one little dangly from, there I am with my word finding issues. What is it you hang above a crib with all the little pieces?
The mobile?
The mobile. Yeah. When you noodle with one piece, they all dance, right? So anything that we do for the current generation living with FASD is by definition going to, affect future generations. But one thing I had wanted to circle back to that we had kind of started talking about before we hit record, and I said, hold that thought because we have to include it in the episode, that those observations that the three of us have made from working in the field for so long, that so much of the FASD world is deficit focused, right? Challenge focused, scaring people. And how do we not only raise awareness of the condition itself, but really highlight for people the hope, right? The strengths in a way that's not like fortune cookie-ish.
Yeah, something tells me that this film we're gonna have to wait for a couple of weeks for. This is gonna be hard.
I know.
That
Excited.
what we are going to need to do is to just get it the heck out there, far and wide, and everything we can to get it out there, and that it will be a huge impetus in bringing the hopefulness into this, the whole other world of, oh my God, I got this, thing. Yep. Yeah. So is this the Center for the Alaska Center? Is it going to be, are they going to be charging for the film? No, good.
I don't know.
Great.
It was made with public money, and so
That's great.
Yeah, it's for the people. So
Wonderful.
I'm so excited to see it, and I'm so grateful for the time that the three of us have spent together this morning. So grateful. I can't wait for the next time the three of us sit down again. But for now, I just need to say that I can't believe our episode is wrapping up already. It has been a nice chunk of time, a pleasure. And for those who want to learn, who want to see the 8 Magic Keys, the original one, you can find it on YouTube. I will put the link in the show notes. I will also have a link to the trailer if you want to watch it again or share it with others. Just share the podcast with others. Yeah, that'll work. But I'll put the link in the show notes as well. If you want to reach out to me to suggest topics for future episodes, then you can write me at livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to join a community of people affected by prenatal exposure to alcohol, then pop over to Facebook and look for the group called Living with FASD Podcast. We'll be glad to see you over there, and we can, start a conversation about today's episode. So by the time this episode is released, is aired, the movie 8 Keys for Adults will be out, and so will my book, Sip by Sip, Candid Conversations with People Diagnosed as Adults with Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorders, FASD. And it's a compilation of 10 stories, one being my own, and the other 9 are conversations I have with people diagnosed, living with FASD. And basically our conversations are transcribed. So it's much like reading one of these episodes, well, reading 9 of them. And one of those people is Dr. Kathryn Page. So if you want to get to know her story, then buy my book. Shameless plug. So that will be on Amazon, of course, Kindle, and in a number of booksellers. So if you prefer to support your local bookstore, I'm all for supporting local business. Just have your bookseller order it. And yeah, exciting stuff. And don't forget also, September is International FASD Awareness Month. Go over to runfasd.org and join a team or do your own, but support FASD United by joining the Run Fast event. I have a team that will be meeting in person in my little neck of the woods, but you don't have to travel to Central California. You can do it wherever you want, or you can just donate and call it good. But my team name is Drillers for FASD Fueling Hope 5K. That's my team because I live in an oil town. So I thought I'd play off of that. Anyway, that's enough for announcements. Stay tuned. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. Circle back next week. And don't forget, this is not only an audible podcast, it's also a vodcast, right? A video podcast. So it is on my YouTube channel. While you're over there, feel free to check out the rest of my content. I have free Friday tidbits on the neurobehavioral model. So that's all there for the taking. Have a great week. And we'll
Thanks
see you
so
next
much.
time on Living with FASD. Ladies, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.